Well, good morning. My name is Tim. I'm thrilled to be back at Inland Hills Church. Hope you guys are doing well. I come out from the surface of the sun, the Coachella Valley. It has been 138 degrees there the last 10 weeks, and so I'm excited to be here with you guys all off the 60. I heard that people keep asking me, like, oh, is it raining out there? I don't know. The water evaporates before it ever reaches the earth out there. And so maybe it's raining about 5,000 feet in the air, but down on the ground, we are baking brownies and frying eggs on the dashes of our cars right now. So it's good to be out of the valley. I'm also glad to be here in the last week of your series called Influencer, because as Pastor Josh has started this series and you've had a couple of other guests move you through some of the concepts in Scripture that each of us are handed influence, I think it's so appropriate, right? This is embarrassing to admit, but I just discovered this week as I was kind of goofing around, prepping for this, I wanted to know how many people followed Justin Bieber on Instagram. And I know that that's a question that's been burning in your brain the entire series. And so fortunately for you, I've done the research, and I've got the answer. If you would guess that it's 100 million people, you would be wrong. You would be off. If you would guess 150 million people, you'd be wrong. You'd be off. It is over 180 million people follow Justin Bieber on Instagram. And now that your life is complete, now that you can die and rest easy, I just wanted to see what are some of the things that people are paying attention to his life. Like, what are some of those exciting updates? And it's pictures of him. And those are the things that they're following about him. And it's interesting because of this, that I think because we've got the term influencer in our culture now, and because there are things like Justin Bieber having 185 million people follow him, and then we see that the things that they're following him for are pictures of him at rehearsal, or pictures of him at his pool, or pictures of him at rehearsal, or pictures of him in his living room, we then can do this. We can downgrade the significance of the word influencer. And if you're watching with us today on eChurch or you're here in the room, we can discount the significance that the correlation between the attention people pay to us and the influence we have over them is. And this downgraded, this reduced concept of what influence really is in our culture, I think is born out of a lot of us going, well, that's ridiculous. I don't have 185 million people following me on Instagram. And if they were following me on Instagram, I don't know what other exciting things that they would be watching other than me vacuuming up after my dog, or me trying to get my kids to get dressed during the summer, or I don't know what else my influence can have. We reduce actually what the concept of influence can be. Let's step away from the world of social media and maybe our reduced concept of what influence really is, and let's step into the world of business. There are two businesses in our country that you all know your favorite location. You all know why you like it. There's Costco and there's Starbucks. And Starbucks and Costco have radically different models of operation. Starbucks model is open a billion of them and hopefully 100 million stick, right? They're just going to open up everywhere. They're going to open up on every corner that's available. So no matter which way you go to work, as you're grumpy and tired on your way, you get a cup of liquid courage and you can go in. They're in as many grocery stores as they possibly can be, so that as you're tired at the end of your day and you're trying to get your brewed food, just a little pick-me-up. They're in airports because you had to wake up, no matter what time your flight was, you had to wake up at 3 a.m. to get ready for your flight, right? And so when you get to the airport, you're all checked in, you need some stuff. They're inside everywhere. Costco is the opposite, right? It's one giant box. They're like, listen, if you want 1,000 almonds, you got to come to us. And we know you want 1,000 almonds because you don't want to keep going out and buying almonds 100 at a time. You just want 1,000 of them. So here we are. There's 1 million parking spaces all around us, and there's still not enough. Sorry about that. But listen, just come, and you're going to spend half a day. And that's just the way it is, but you're going to leave with 8 gallons of milk, 1,000 almonds, and 14 pounds of ground beef so that you don't have to do this again. Opposite ends of the extreme, right? That's my point. I'm spending too long talking about the fact that Starbucks is small and lean and mean so they can be everywhere. And Costco is just like the 800-pound gorilla, like, listen, we know you want 50 packs of top ramen, come and get it. Which business model is the right one? Which business is successful? Well, I think we'd all say that both businesses are successful in their own lane. Now, I'll bring up at the very end of our time together why this is important today. Because as we end our series on influence, I just don't want us to miss the fact that God has designed you to carry influence. And whether you're a big box influencer or you're a lean and mean influencer, just because the world of social media we think is like, okay, well, that's ridiculous though, it does not mean that your role in this generation is without value, purpose, and significance. And as we move through our story today, you're going to see, hopefully, what I mean. If you've got a Bible and you're at home or you're here in this room, my preference is always that you open it yourself. So if you've got it on your phone, if you've got, back in the olden days, we would print things on paper. And so some of you have a book Bible. If you open to Mark chapter 5, you're going to be able to see with your own eyes this story unfold. And it's a story of unlikely courage in choosing to be an influencer. Mark chapter 5, if you're there, I'm going to get started. Here we go. Verse 1 says this, they came to the other side of the sea. Who did? I'll tell you who, Jesus and 12 fellows that he was teaching. They called them disciples. To the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs, so he's in a graveyard, a man with an unclean spirit. Our culture would say demon. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with the chain, for he had been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles to pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, by God, don't mess with me." I know it says torment, but ain't nobody say torment in our modern day and age. I wanted to say don't jack with me, but I didn't want you to think I was taking the scriptures flippantly. But he says, don't mess with me. For Jesus was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Well, Jesus asked him, "What's your name?" And he replied, one of the freakiest sentences in all of language, "My name is Legion, for we are many." If you are in a graveyard with a freaky half-naked dude who keeps breaking out of chains, and he says to you, "My name is Legion because we are many," man, it is time to get back in the boat. But Jesus remains. And this dude begged Jesus earnestly not to send them out of that region. Now, a great herd of pigs was feeding on the hillside. Oh, so the dude lives in a graveyard by pigs. Interesting. We'll pick up on that later. And they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs. Let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs. And the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. Welcome to church. We got a story about a demon-possessed man who lived by pigs, and they all drowned in a terrible accident. Let's close in prayer. Hope you feel blessed. In our series on influence, and in our culture where influence has been reduced to people following pictures of you doing menial things, it is easy for us to excuse ourselves out of the role that God has called us to. And however unlikely your situation might be connected to your potential for influence, this generation needs you, I cannot stress this, more than potentially any other generation of faith in American history. Now, I understand the beginning of our country, the beginning of our nation was a radically unique time, and so it is possible that that generation is more significant than us. But it is possible, based on the amount of people we have influence over, that this generation and what we do with faith in the next 12 years is possibly the most pivotal generation of faith in American history. And we discount the role that we play in it because we're not significant in one way or another. We look at the Costco-size influencers in our culture, and we think, I'm glad that they can sell so much influence for the kingdom, and we downplay, potentially, our Starbucks-sized influence. Well, this story, as we make our way through it, we're going to extract a lot out of what's going on here, because what Jesus does at the end of this story is affirm the influence that this man has, and hopefully it will affirm the influence that you have as well. Now, there are some things you've got to notice about this story for us to pick up on everything that Jesus is putting down. Number one is this: you've got to notice the settings. I know you guys all picked up on it, but just humor me for a moment. You guys remember that this is in the Decapolis, right? Yeah, Tim, of course. It's in the region of the Gerasenes, which is one of the 10 cities that banded together for the sake of trade, and they called themselves the League of the Decapolis. We know all about that. No, you didn't. So, let me tell you where Jesus is. He is in an area that once upon a time was given to the nation of Israel. But man, if you know anything about your Jewish history, you know that there was 2 times in their history that they were taken away by different kingdoms. First by the Assyrians, later by the Babylonians, then later on the Persians. If you're familiar with the story of the Battle of Thermopylae, or that movie that was popular for a minute, 300, the Persians ruled the world differently than most kingdoms up to that point. As a matter of fact, Karush, or Cyrus the Great, from Persia, moved the Jews back to their homeland. And he actually gave them money to build their wall and rebuilt their temple. Really interesting stuff. You're bored. Okay, I'll keep moving. When they're in that region, they're kind of shaky as a kingdom, and eventually the Greeks take over, and eventually the Greeks are replaced by the Romans. Well, a Roman general named Pompey, I think around 60, 70 years before Jesus was born, Pompey conquers this area that Jesus is standing in right now. And it's no longer Jewish, it's Greek. And it's no longer now Greek, it's now Roman. So when Jesus crosses the lake and he lands in this area, Gerasenes is one of the cities amongst this League of 10 that was, it was Roman. It was not Jewish. You were well outside the family of faith when you were in the Decapolis. So if you were paying attention, which I know you were, and you know your Bible geographical history, which I know you do, you're like, oh, cool, Tim, Jesus has left what most people would consider the family of faith, and he's out in no man's land right now. He's kind of like out there with a people of no faith. This is a highly secular region. I'm glad you noticed that, because it's super important. Now that you've noticed that, I also want you to notice all the different layers of darkness. You're not picking up on things because culturally they're so different from the day we live in now. If I told you a quick little sentence, when I was a junior, most of the guys on the varsity football team went to Jack Murphy Stadium to watch a Padres game. And during the 7th inning, 2 sophomores wanted to show off how cool they were, and so they decided they would hop the wall and run from third base out to center field, and then hop the back wall and hopefully escape. Well, we were thrilled about this because we wanted to see what would happen when they jumped the wall, ran past third base out towards center field. Now, there's a ton of detail in that story that you're picking up on because you know things like third base and center field and hop the wall. You're instantly jumping to the conclusion of that story, which you're probably right on, by the way. Tim, did they get tackled and arrested? Yes. Yes, they did get tackled and arrested, and the rest of us loved it. And they won favor in our hearts. What's interesting is I didn't explain to any of you that the wall was restricted so that spectators for a Major League Baseball game that I was attending, that we stayed behind it so that the players would play, and it's illegal to do that. I didn't do that. I said third base and center field and hop the wall because you know all of those things. You already knew where the story was going because of the language I used. You've got to notice a bunch of stuff about this story, that when Mark is writing all of this down, you should be freaking out right now, and you're not freaking out, so let me freak you out. The first thing is the fact that the man lived in the tombs. Now, any of us would be uncomfortable with this if we really thought about it. So if we did, at the end of the summer, we're going to do an outreach. We've really taken care of kids with school supplies. Tim, we killed it. We already solved the problem in our valley. We need another thing to do for outreach. Hey, let's do this. Let's visit a local graveyard because I hear there's a homeless guy that lives there, and let's spend some time with him in a Bible study. You might be like, tell me more about what the kids need, actually, Tim. Let's do that. Even in a modern-day Stephen King kind of way, the fact that this man lived among the tombs is uncomfortable. But take yourself back. Do you remember that in the Jewish ceremonial law, you were not supposed to go near a dead body? You were unclean. You were not fit to participate in worship if you had been around a dead body. Well, this man lives among the tombs, and that means in a Jew's mind, he's never fit to worship God. He's always staying away. He's never engaged. So when Mark drops that he lives among the tombs, he's telling you a lot of cultural cues. This guy was perpetually rejected by people of faith. He was an outsider. Now, the second thing you should have picked up on, which I'm sure you did, is that he lived near the water. And now you're thinking, well, Tim, wait a second. How is that an indication of darkness? How is this a bad thing? Like, those of us who live inland love to be near the water. On summer vacation, we try and get near water, a lake or an ocean. Except, you know what I've noticed living in the Coachella Valley? Not a lot of people vacation at the Salton Sea. Maybe it's because it smells like death. I'm not sure. But other than that, our culture loves to be near water. Well, did you know that for most of human history, open water is actually an indication of fear? Think about the fact that if you're older, if you've got a 4-year-old grandchild, how much do you want them walking near an on-ramp of the 60? Probably none, right? If you're a parent, how much do you want your kids playing near the freeway? Well, none. Because as soon as you make one mistake by the freeway, you don't bounce back from that, okay? Same concept has been true for most of human history near open water. I've been places in the modern world that if you're near open water, the people who live there are terrified of it. Because if you make one mistake near open water, you don't come back from it. I've lived in fishing villages, I've visited fishing villages in my role as a missions pastor, where grown men who spend their entire life near and on the water, if they fall in, they die. In a mission trip to Sri Lanka 5 years ago, 6 years ago, not in the olden times, but 5 years ago, a fisherman was walking out with his boat and he got in chest high. It was too deep and he drowned. So when Jesus is visiting a man near the open water, near the tombs, people would have been nervous to be in this area. You don't live near the open water. Open water is, it makes you anxious. Now, the other thing you noticed was weird, but it didn't do in you what it was supposed to do in you. When you lived near the pigs, this would have been, to a person of Jewish faith, if you believed in Yahweh, this would have been really uncomfortable. You think about the housing market right now in California. It's so easy to break into, right? It's just welcomes people in. No, it does not. The housing market in California is actively prohibitive. It's like there's a grumpy lion that is trying to consume your money, and you got to fight to get in. Well, what if there's a young couple and they're so desperate just to break in? Maybe she's pregnant, they're going to start their own family, and the housing market is just so rough that you're looking and looking and looking, and they bid and they bid and they bid, and they can't win. And the way they break in is there's this old rundown duplex, and it's a little uncomfortable. Half of it is a one-bedroom. It's a duplex. It's going to be their own place, but on the other side of the wall, it used to be a duplex, but they've blown out the wall, and it's a strip club. And you're like, whoa, we got to break in somehow, and so you buy the other half of a strip club as your starter home. And it's just awkward, right? When it's time to sign up in the fall for small groups, and we're going to sign up for a small group, we could host it, and oh, where do you live? And you're like, we live, we'll come to your place, actually. We're not going to host a small group in our home because it's so uncomfortable to explain to people that that's where you'd live. You remember in the Jewish code, that you weren't supposed to be around unclean animals, right? And on that list was pigs. Can you think of the reputation that this man would have had to the Jewish mind? As Jesus was moving around Israel, he suddenly stops to spend time with a grave-digging, pig-living, semi-nude, demon-possessed Greek? Like, this guy is a million miles from God. He's all kind of awkward. He's so uncomfortable that you wouldn't even visit. And then the last thing that we know about him is that he lived with demons. And our culture struggles with this, and I want to be really honest with the room. I've grown up in middle-class American church, just like all of us have. And in the flavors of American church that I've grown up in, we acknowledge the supernatural, but it's almost like the supernatural happened in the first century, and then it stopped happening. And like angels and demons backed off and like, all right, well, Jesus is gone, so we won't interact with the world anymore. And the flavor of Christianity I grew up with is very moral, it's very organized, but in terms of engaging the supernatural, this whole concept that a man lived with demonic oppression is almost like pretend to me. It's not quite pretend, but it's right next to pretend. And I struggle because I'm a pastor and I teach the scriptures, and the scriptures are super clear that the demonic influences the natural world. It just does. The Bible's very comfortable discussing the supernatural. Well, let's see, my son was in 8th grade and he's 11th grade now. So 3.5 years ago, I was in a village outside the city of Lilongwe, and Lilongwe, you guys all know, is in the country of Malawi. We fly into Malawi, and we're working in a Bible college in Lilongwe. And as the Bible college graduates people into ministry, those graduates go back out to their villages and they plant churches. Well, what our church liked to do is follow a graduate who's this new young pastor. And right when a church would plant in a village, we would try and either do malaria meds so that they could save their babies, or we'd try and put in a clean water well. So that, watch this, how cool is this? Jesus shows up in their village, and so does clean water. And so that the grace and the favor on the people would like honor Jesus. So we're out in one of these villages, and I can't explain to you how remote out there we are. Think of National Geographic. Anybody remember Jeff Corwin? Like, just think of like you're out there and then go further. That's where we were. And one of the things that this village did is, I need to explain a concept that's uncomfortable. In this village, if a mother died in childbirth, they would bury the child with the mom. That sounds barbaric to you, but you don't understand the lack of resources. That mother's body was the resource to sustain the baby. And if there was no other adult woman that could take that baby on to raise it, there were no resources for the child. And so at one point, a missionary discovered this was the practice, broke their heart, and they thought, man, food formula is 4 hours away, and there's no way for them to get it. So they started a ministry that moved formula into the villages so that even 10-year-old sisters could keep their baby siblings alive. And so once a week, they show up and they deliver formula, and they do really small coaching about health and wellness for these babies. Well, we're there the day that they bring in the formula, and we're helping them. We're helping coach the older sisters. The whole thing is heartbreaking and life-giving all at once. And one thing they do in this highly animistic, highly pagan village, before they give out the formula, they say, hey, can we just teach you every week a little bit more about Jesus? Well, there's 7 girls that are here to get formula the day we're in the village. And an 8th showed up. She'd never been before. And as they're doing the devotional, I'm in the back of the room. It's mostly the ladies on our team working with these girls. I'm in the back of the room, and the girl starts screaming. Now, I'm from middle-class American culture, and I'm used to people screaming, and I think, oh, she probably feels like she didn't get enough formula, that somebody got in front of her in line, that she's grumpy that she has to wait till next week. Like, I'm thinking customer service. I really am. But the more that I'm kind of looking across the room and I'm watching her, the screams are different. They just are. It's not about customer service. This is not about like being next in line. This is not about any of that. The screams are guttural, and she's sweating, and she's getting violent. And the African women who were with us in the village that day, who'd moved out from the Bible college, they knew exactly what was going on. And they got up, and they attended this girl, and they went outside. Well, the Papa Bear in me is like torn at this moment, because I'm watching the African women know more about, they know what's going on, and I don't. But I'm also watching this girl be pretty angry and violent. And so I'm like, I kind of don't want to go out and help them, but I really feel like I should go out and help them. And so I'm on my way out, and they whisked her into this like hut building. And I'm like, oh, why'd we go into a closed space? And so I'm now round the corner, and I don't know how to explain to you what I saw, other than when I read this story from Mark. This is the best thing that I've ever read that would correlate with what I was watching. This girl was screaming from somewhere deep inside. And what had I learned after the fact is there was a village witch doctor, a shaman. And this witch doctor, this girl had been going to bring different offerings so that he could perform different spells to bring health to her home. Well, these 7 girls who'd been coming and getting formula from the believers invited her repeatedly to come to the chapel and to get this health. They told her, stop going to the witch doctor. He doesn't have power. Well, she decided to go that day. And during the devotional was about the fact that Jesus had power. I'm going to tell you guys straight up, and we'll all have to deal with what's going on. The demon in her absolutely revolted against that devotion. And he's fighting and screaming with her. And in this room, there's a woman named Dua. And Dua had grown up in a village, and she'd gone to African Bible College in Lilongwe, had learned so much about the gospel, and now she's back in a village. She knows everything that's going on. And guess what was not super valuable at that point in time? My ability to organize a budget for VBS was not like the most important thing, right? Like my ability to coordinate a social media campaign for the fall launch of small groups was not super important in that moment. Dua, sitting in this village, speaking in Chichewa with this girl, kept telling her, you can choose someone more powerful. His name is Jesus. You can choose someone more powerful. His name is Jesus. Over and over. And then she would pray. And I'm outside the doorway of the building. I can't leave because I don't want to abandon Dua. But I also know that in this moment, all my Bible knowledge and all my pastoral experience is yielded to the leadership that Dua is providing this moment. And I will never forget until the day I die when this girl screamed out Jesus. She screamed out the name Jesus. And I'm like, oh! And I'm telling you, in a moment's time, she stopped sweating, she stopped screaming, and she sat down, and she and Dua began to speak normally. I don't know what to do with this story other than to teach it and yield myself to this reality. I get that in the flavor of Christianity I've grown up in, it's a lot of organization and morality. And those things are in the New Testament. But you know what else is in the New Testament? The reality that there is a spiritual world that wars for us, against us, with us. And in this story, this man lived near open water where no one wanted to be. He lived near pigs where no one wanted to be. He lived near dead bodies where no one wanted to be. And in his isolation, he was tormented by the demonic world. I mean, it was a dark situation. And with all these things that are true about him, I would like to submit this to you. I have now found the least qualified person to wield influence for the kingdom of God. You might think you're too boring to be an influencer. You ain't this bad. You might think that you're not mature enough to be an influencer. You ain't this bad. You might think, oh, I'm not good with the words and stuff. All you pastors, you talk so much. I'm not good like that. Man, you ain't like this, right? This dude is dark. And then watch what happens at the end of the story. So these pigs die, and the herdsmen see it, and they fled into the city, told it in the city and in the country, and people came to see what had happened. Oh, wait a second. He's picking up followers on the gram. And they came to Jesus, saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there clothed in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described it to them, what had happened, and the demon-possessed man, and the pigs, and all this freaky stuff. And they began to beg Jesus to teach them more about who. Well, they began to beg Jesus to teach them more. Oh, they began to beg Jesus to get out of their area. They were so freaked out by this whole story. They were so uncomfortable with everything that was happening. Guess what? People in an unchurched, faithless region didn't want to engage this at all. And I'll just say this. This miracle made a lot of people uncomfortable. So this girl, I'm just telling you, she was delivered from a demon the day that I was in this village. And the rest of that day, you would think that I would be floating. I'd be like, man, Jesus, you can organize VBSs and cast out demons. Like, this is amazing. I love it so much. The rest of my day in that village, 3 huts down was the shaman. 3. Not like a day's journey. Nope. Not a dirt bike ride. 3 houses. Uncle Rico could have thrown a football and hit his house, okay? That's how close he was to where we were. And all the rest of that day, I knew, because I read my Bible, that dude just lost a client. That dude has now lost 8 clients because of believers. My 8th grade son was with me on that trip. And so you better believe that I'm trying to grow faith in my soul the rest of that day and honor God for what he had done and catch my maturity level up, not just like where the moral and organizational parts are in the Scripture, but all of Scripture. But I had one eye down that road the rest of the day, because if that dude came out of his hut with the machete, me and my boy were about to be gone, okay? We were not going to try and witness for Jesus. Listen, sir, you just need to yield your life to Jesus right now. He's like, I'm losing clients right and left to the work you're doing. These people in the story, they're the shaman. They come out and they're like, listen, what is happening? I'm not comfortable with any of this. Jesus, you need to get out. And the balance of power was threatened. The balance of power was upset. Can I be really clear right now and try and tie a connection before we end our time? We're living in a pretty godless age, aren't we? We just are. It's really overwhelming. I am a very level-headed person. I'm a learner. I'm an engager. I'm a relator. And so for me, living in a highly divided time, living in a highly confused time, a lot of the time smells like opportunity to me. But even for a person like me, man, the last few years are starting to shake me. And I really feel like our culture is ready to just dismiss an entire half of our country. Be like, I'm so uncomfortable with what you're thinking of economically or racially or apparently health or all of these things that we're ready to just dismiss each other permanently. And then what does that do in the heart of a believer who's called to have influence? In a culture that's dismissive, in a culture that is just perpetually uncomfortable, we now are always triggered. What do we get to pull from a Bible story, from a series in church, that is going to call us back into situations like this? To be around people that are honestly pretty dang uncomfortable. What do we do? What does our generation of faith rise up to in this moment? Well, I'll tell you. Here's the answer. Verse 18. So as Jesus was getting into the boat, Jesus was like, cool, all right, I fixed it, I'm out. He's getting ready to leave. The man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him. And he did not permit him, but he said to him, go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he's had mercy on you. And he went away. And he began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And everyone marveled. I'm going to leave it here for a minute, because this verse is the conclusion of this series. It just is. Because I'll tell you what I want. I just want to elect a politician that's going to magically unify it all. I'm starting to think that might not be possible. I want to vote for a law that everyone's just going to be super excited about and just get us all back together. I'm starting to wonder if it's even possible. I'm just waiting for there to be man, I'm a super cool celebrity that's just happy enough and chill enough. Maybe it's Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, right? He's kind of that middle of the road, everybody likes him kind of guy. And just fix it, man. I just want to go back to not being stressed all the time. I just kind of want Jesus to take me out of the conflict. But here's what Jesus did with the man. He solved the conflict in him. He gave this man a miracle, an absolute miracle. And then the man said, Jesus, let me jump in the boat with you and get out of this place because they're so discombobulated. They're so all over the place. They're so broken. And Jesus said, actually, here's what's cool about what I've done for you. I've healed you, and now you get to be a witness in this entire region. I'm going to leave some Jesus behind in you. And Jesus says the miracle is different than magic. The miracle for this man was the opportunity. What this man inherited was a new life and the opportunity to live in it. And I think for some of us, Jesus has worked something in you that was miraculous, and now you're left with the opportunity to carry it. So for some of you, it's your marriage. Your marriage was in a rough spot, and God has done a work in it. And now, with your marriage, you've inherited the opportunity to use it as testimony. For some of you, it's substance. For some of you, it's something else entirely. And God is giving you the opportunity to carry that as an influence in your area. The miracle is different than magic because Jesus chose him to stay with his people. And this is really what I'd like to close with is that Jesus has chosen you to be in your world for a reason. I'm going to say something that is absolutely true, but it might not make sense to you. I happen to love your pastor, Pastor Josh. You guys know that I've been a friend of Inland Hills for a long time now. I loved Andrew, and I love Josh as well. And it's easy for us to identify some of these guys as leaders and the rest of us as people that choose to say, I trust your leadership over my life. But do you realize that your world trusts you more than they trust Josh? They don't know Josh at all. Josh has no reputation with them, but your world trusts you. And let me say it this way. Starbucks is not big and flashy like a Costco. I don't even know how much money could be sold if Costco sold everything they had in one store. I think it would repair the economy in just one fell swoop, right? Just the amount of TVs and Apple computers are in Costco's is astounding to me. And it's almost like pastors or Christmas Eve services or VBS or Easter. Those are those big box moments of influence in Christianity. But do you understand that your Starbucks, do you know what that means? Y'all are everywhere. You're everywhere. And people can always have access to the gospel through your influence. Man, if I was designing a business, I love Costco, but I'll tell you what, man, if I could think of something smart enough that could literally be in garages and airports and grocery stores, there are businesses in other businesses. That's genius right there. And you are God's kingdom. You're everywhere. When you go out shopping in Target, it's not that Starbucks is already there, it's that the gospel is already there. When you head off to work in education or healthcare or truck driving, the gospel is already there. Jesus is brilliant. He's not just wise. He's not a grandpa on a porch saying things like, when it rains, things get wet. Like he's brilliant. And in his brilliance, he's got access to the gospel everywhere because y'all are everywhere. I don't know how brutally honest I'm allowed to be in this season of church. This has been a hard season in American church. Our church used to have 4,000 people a weekend at it. You know how many people are in person right now at our church? 1,500. Did we lose? Did we win? Is that even the right way to think about it? Because right now, our church has influence everywhere that our people are. And it's silly to judge the success of a church based on how many people gather in the room. A way better way to define what we're doing is if you're willing to carry the gospel with you wherever you go. We had at Easter, 3,000 people for Easter. But you know what? I bet you every single person that came to our Easter interacted with 10 people that week. You probably interact with 10 people a week? Let's say that you're quiet. You're nowhere Bieber status. You're so lame. Ugh. You interact with 10 people a week. Do you know how many people our church actually reached at Easter then? 30,000. They didn't all come to our gathering. Our gathering is one thing, but the church interacted with 30,000 people, unless the people in our church don't believe they carry Jesus with them. And if they don't believe that, then our church didn't reach any more than sat in a chair on a Sunday. But if they believe that everybody they interact with has access to the gospel, then that's where the action's at. So when I say that the next 12 years of American church culture are probably the most significant, it's going to be a generation of believers who either embrace that church is what happens inside a building once a week, or a church is a body of believers who takes the gospel with them everywhere. Jesus chose him to stay with his people. Man, you are Starbucks freaking naked demon dude, and I want you to be here in the Decapolis because I've got nobody in the Decapolis except you. And he's like, all right, then if you want me to carry the weight of what you've done in my life, I'm going to tell everybody that I interact with, and they're all going to be like, wait, that's that pig-living, grave-digging, semi-naked, violent demon dude. And he's going to be like, well, I was, but now I know like 2 things about Jesus, and I'm going to tell you both of them until you believe too. And Jesus was in the Decapolis. Jesus, man, last thing I want to say is just this. Jesus has got compassion for the rejected, y'all. He just does. I am so concerned all the time by cancel culture. I just am. And then you add on top of cancel culture the concept of a God who knows everything and is all-powerful, and he's like the ultimate counselor, right? Because for sure I'm going to disappoint him this week. For sure I'm going to let him down. Except when I open my Bible, it's not just this vaguely altruistic concept. It's not just this like, well, I wish it was true about him and I find enough pastors to say it. I'm reading my Bible and I see Jesus interact with one of the most dark humans that he could have. And Jesus is so compassionate with him. He's so patient. And then he believes in him. And then he charges him. And then he sends him. And so God is either one of 2 things. He's either always angry with you and he is the king of cancel culture, or he's the God of the scriptures. And he's patient and he actually likes you and he's like rooting for you and he's with you and he'll call to use you as well. Maybe influence isn't measured in the amount of people that pay attention to your life. Maybe influence is measured by the person who's giving you the people. Maybe it's measured by the one who roots for you. Tell you what, I'm not sponsored by anybody. I'm not backed by anybody. There's no label. Like I ain't got no major like website following. But I know a God who loves violent, naked, pig-living, grave-digging Greeks. And if he loves them, then he probably loves Republicans. He probably loves Democrats. He probably loves Black America. He probably loves white America. He probably loves the sexually confused. He probably loves the violent. He probably loves the peaceful. And so no matter where we step in a culture that is perpetually divided, I get to carry influence. Oh, what a time we live in. What an opportunity you have. And what a God we serve. Father, call our church to bear influence. Father, it will not be measured in the tens of millions. It's going to be measured in our faithfulness to represent you. It's going to be measured in the opportunity we have to carry the miracle you worked in our life. It's going to be measured in the way that we choose to say, whatever you've done in me is sufficient for the next. Jesus, the next decade of church life matters. And so I pray that you would call us to influence this world for you.